Bom, boa tarde a todos, a todas. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos para esse nosso encontro hoje aqui com a professora Maria Cristina Nicolau Cormichiari, do Museu de Arqueologia e Etnologia da USP, a professora Adriane Tacla, da Universidade Federal Fluminense do Rio de Janeiro, e o professor Jörg Rüpke, de Eckford. Professor Alessandro Mortaio Gregori, por favor, aproxime-se. Pode sentar aqui conosco, um dos mediadores, que representa, ele é mestre em arqueologia e doutor pela Faculdade de Educação, está representando o Laboratório de Arqueologia Romana Provincial hoje aqui neste encontro para discutir o livro do professor Jörg Rüpke. Então, sejam todos muito bem-vindos, vocês que estão aí no YouTube, né, do lado de lá da telinha, todos aqui presentes, muito obrigado por terem comparecido. Passo a palavra agora para a professora Cormichiari, que vai conduzir o evento.
Muito obrigada, thank you, Wagner. Primeiro de tudo, eu gostaria muito de agradecer ao professor Porto por ter nos aberto o espaço aqui do IEA e agilizado todas as questões, né? E o laboratório que ele coordena, né, o LARP, Laboratório de Arqueologia Romano Provincial, do Museu de Arqueologia e Etnologia, o MAI, aqui da Universidade de São Paulo, dialoga muito, né? Então, com todas as questões do livro do professor Rüpke, que a gente, né, fez essa roda de conversa hoje para justamente apresentar ao público brasileiro. Então, muito obrigada, professor Porto. Obviamente vai continuar participando, fazendo perguntas. Agradecendo imensamente a hiperprofissional equipe do IEA, sempre apostos, sempre muito gentis. Muito obrigado. So, I guess, I don't know what to do. I will speak briefly in English to let Professor Rüpke participate in our conversation. Do you understand a little bit the Portuguese, or no, nothing? Very little, yeah. Our language is not easy. So, first of all, it's an honor to have you here with us, among us today, to talk about a part of your research, which is immense and which is very original and has changed in many ways the way our discipline, either history, social sciences, archaeology, approach humans regarding religion and regarding how we settle in on Earth, utilize the space. So thank you very much, Professor Rüpke, for being here. I just wanted, before I present you in Portuguese, I just wanted to, I'm going to speak in Portuguese to them to point out that our partnership began with the incentive of Felipe Perissato, who is here, who is a PhD student at MAI and at Professor Rüpke's university, who is being supervised by Professor Rüpke and myself, studying ancient religion in Athens. And in 2019, right, Felipe? We began, 18 even, right? We began a little bit before, no, 19. 18, huh? And then we were very gladly met in London during the Congress, the Classical Studies Congress, and from there it was very smooth. Professor Rüpke always very gentle, very steady, and then when he approached me with the possibility of having his book, one of his books, his book translated into Portuguese and to be published here, I found the idea very good, and then I'll start in Portuguese in a couple of minutes. We totally went for it. So this is the book that today we're going to talk about. Professor Rüpke is going to make some comments about how this book came to be, regarding himself, his research, his train of thoughts. And then I have invited Professor Alessandro Mortaio, who is from LARP, from the Laboratório Roman Provincial Archaeology Laboratory, and Professor Adrienne Tacla from the Federal Fluminense University, the History Department, Ancient History is her specialization. And unfortunately, Professor Guarinello, due to private reasons, could not be here. I'm very sorry for that. It would be really nice to have him here another time. Other times will come. We are planning a trip, right, Professor Rüpke, of you here in São Paulo next year, not next year, the year next to that, so more to come. I'll change to Portuguese now. Então, eu queria apresentar, né, eu estava comentando como a parceria com a Universidade de Erfurt e com o professor Rüpke, que se iniciou já há alguns anos. Temos um programa de doutorado acontecendo em parceria com a supervisão do professor Rüpke. Nos conhecemos já antes da pandemia, então, né, só para demonstrar que é já um contato, uma abertura de diálogo da nossa universidade com a Universidade de Erfurt e na Alemanha. E, então, quando o professor Rüpke teve a ideia, apareceu com a ideia da gente publicar aqui no Brasil o livro dele, né, vertido para o português, foi com muito prazer que a gente correu atrás e fizemos, aqui sendo editado pela Editora Appris. E, então, é isso que eu ia falar. Eu estava falando em inglês mais ou menos essas coisas, mas em português que eu queria falar. Nós estamos distribuindo o livro, né? Porque é um livro bancado com dinheiro público da Alemanha, então não é visado lucro. Então, ele está sendo distribuído. Vocês podem, quem tiver interesse, pode entrar. Eu estou distribuindo para as universidades, para professores, mas, eventualmente, escrever para a gente ali no Labeca. Se tiver interesse, então, em receber o livro, entre em contato. E também, quem tiver perguntas para fazer, né, também escreve uma mensagem para a gente no iearesponde@usp.br. E aí a gente vai tanto tentar responder as suas perguntas, quanto mandar o livro. Bom, para apresentar, então, o professor Rüpke, muito brevemente, porque poderia ficar falando bastante tempo de todas as atividades dele, mas o professor, então, o professor doutor Jörg Rüpke é fellow permanente em Ciências da Religião e vice-diretor do Centro Max Weber de Estudos Sociais e Culturais Avançados da Universidade de Erfurt, na Alemanha, que é, então, um laboratório de estudos de ciências sociais interdisciplinar, né, muito interessante. É atualmente porta-voz do programa internacional Resonant Self-World Relations in Ancient and Modern Social Religious Practices, em cooperação com a Universidade de Graz, da Áustria, e co-líder do projeto Religion and Urbanity, Reciprocal Formations, no Centro Max Weber da Universidade de Erfurt, na Alemanha. É professor honorário da Universidade de Aarhus, na Dinamarca, desde 2011, e, em 2021, recebeu da Universidade de Graz, na Áustria, o título de professor honoris causa. É autor de inúmeras publicações acadêmicas e muitos livros também, e pela primeira vez lança a edição brasileira de uma de suas obras mais recentes, o livro Religião Urbana, uma abordagem histórica, pela Editora Appris. Vou mostrar de novo o livro, porque a capa ficou super bonita. Então, eu mostro de novo. Tá certo? Alessandro, shall we begin with Adrienne? Because she has the internet, right? So now it's working, so I want to profit from it.
Aqui a internet hoje está funcionando. Segunda-feira ela estava engasgando, então não sei. So a gente pode ir fazendo junto, qualquer coisa eu tento aqui pelo celular.
Okay, so but let's begin with you, right?
E o professor não vai, acho que ele tem
Oh, sorry.
Fala,
yes, né? I am already jumping the wagon. How do you say in English? Jumping the wagon. So yes, of course. Nós começamos justamente com uma fala do professor Rüpke sobre como esse livro chegou até nós. Jörg.
Ja, bom dia. Sinto muito não entender português. Leia pouco não fala. Alors, I have to switch to English for this presentation. I get a few, nouns and names from your Portuguese introduction, but fortunately, I have been provided with a few written notes that will help me to answer in the discussion. Let me start by thanking all of you for your interest in that book and the topic of my research. As many of you may know, I'm a historian of religion with a focus on the ancient Mediterranean world and religion at Rome and of the Romans in particular. Perhaps it's not without interest if I sketch a bit the intellectual path that has been leading to the present book, not least because it is not some genial genealogy of ideas, but rather a story of trial and error, moving into the one direction first and into the opposite second. And perhaps that is also encouraging for the younger scholars listening now, like Felipe, if you forgive me that paternalistic, self-excusing remark. I started my research trajectory so many years back by investigating Roman warfare. This has recently been published in a revised English translation as Peace and War in Ancient Rome. But it was an analysis of rituals and beliefs rituals by general, by soldiers, by the inhabitants of Rome before, during, and after a campaign. And thus, it was above all an analysis of rituals. And I guess we will come back to the question of ritual later in the discussion, of course. However, the most important finding of that book was a different one. And this is reflected in the Latin title of the German original, Domi Militiae, so at home, domi, and abroad, outside of the home, in the area of warfare. I had not even heard of the spatial turn in 1990, I must admit, but the evidence that I found in studying these rituals pointed to an interesting cultural construction, even and especially during warfare. The city of Rome itself was constructed as a peaceful place. Peace and war were not temporal, but spatial concepts. Unfortunately, I did not follow up on the latter, but stayed with the former, the temporal, doing research on the Roman calendar. And only at the end of the decade, spatial interest came back in when I had the privilege of leading a large national research consortium investigating what we called processes of globalization and regionalization in the history of ancient religion. And you see already globalism also hiding in that package. We started from the then deeply ingrained idea that ancient religion was a thinly veiled form of politics and above all expression of collective, even if complex, identities of city-states. If that was true, so our argument ran, there must have been a religious correlative of the formation of an imperial and more territorial state, namely the Imperium Romanum. But again, we were surprised by the findings. There was neither an imperial nor even a provincial religion, despite all processes of diffusion and amalgamation. Imperial cult was a nice medium of communication and the self-affirmation of local elites, but it often post-dated integration of a city or territory into the Roman Empire by centuries. We were a bit embarrassed by the finding, given that we had chosen imperial and provincial religion as title of agenda and agenda of the project, but by the time our results were consolidated, we had already reached the end of the last period of financing anyway, so no harm was done in that sense. Against that background, the focus of research had to be shifted anew, and again did not deepen, but rather lost the spatial focus. With the help of a sociologist, I designed a large comparative, cross-cultural and cross-spatial project investigating the religious option of individuals in supposedly collective cultures. Religious individualization in historical perspective was the tactically now more open title, and the importance and validity of that perspective fully paid out in a sub-project called Lived Ancient Religion. Its main contribution was to show that we have to bid farewell to the idea that the concept of polis or civic religion offered the best and most encompassing way to analyze and describe ancient religion. Instead, it was possible to locate the very idea and practice of a rule-based normative public religion on just one point of a much larger scale of religious options. There was as much informed by individual initiatives as by processes of group formations among or also against local elites. I must admit that I'm still pleased with the many and important outcomes of the project, resulting in hundreds of articles by authors from within and outside of the research group, and the book Pantheon, A New History of Roman Religion that I have authored. And yet, in concluding this project, and I think by now you might start to be annoyed by these dialectical movements, but I can't help it. So in concluding this project, I realized that such individual creativity and group formation, also including the political use of religion, as well as the privatized or even segregation-oriented usage of religion, happened to have a clear spatial locus, the city. And by 2016, when I published the German version, I managed to slip in at least the idea of looking at the city into the introduction to Pantheon in its proof stage, and started to look for funding for following this perspective again. And this is why when you need funding, even if you're not an archaeologist, doing such a research in a broad and comparative format. It was not easy to find funding initially, but easy to find co-investigators. Religion and the city have a relationship with each other and challenge us. First of all, I mean, we are all in a certain sense both urbanites or conscious non-urbanites on the one hand, and people with either a positive or negative relationship to religion on the other. This includes the religious and the spiritually interested of very different shades, people who just do religion occasionally, and the non-religious or even anti-religious. But a deep historical retrospective seems to show that both roles, being urban, being religious, were so closely linked that we should formulate any blueprint, even for the future, not only as academics, but as citizens with this awareness and knowledge of the past. Of course, everyone must argue about the content of such a draft in terms of the normative. I think historians have to be rather observers, but ultimately as citizens, they have to engage in it nevertheless. Now, this is my initial observation. The cities of the present are altering religion far and wide and in very different ways. And this you can find widespread in the literature of the past 20 years. Places of traditional religious practices become cultural heritage. Religious practices settle in pedestrian zones and backyards. Religious organizations provide urban services and infrastructures from kindergartens to nursing homes. Cinemas become spaces of religious experiences. Religious groups enter into alliances. Religious identities make it possible to also distance oneself from the majority, which is otherwise hardly possible in the networked world of life. Such changes are, and this is now my contention, my claim, and the basic claim of the book, that such changes are not new, but a basic feature of urban religion. So religion, I think, has always been the motor, but also the victim, the shaper and overcomer of the city. What religion seems to be today in its various medial and organizational forms, in its diversities, individual spirituality, but also in its use by states, is to a large extent the result of this very process of what we called a mutual formation of religion and the urban. And I think this is true in China, as in Brazil, in Northern Europe, as in Australia. And conversely, and this is also important, these religious practices and ideas have shaped urban space, have shaped urban coexistence and ideas of urbanity inside and outside of cities. The book Religião Urbana does not provide a global and comprehensive historical analysis, and I think everybody who has taken a look into this, and I mean it's even admitted on the back side and the back of the book, but it uses above all examples of ancient urbanization to open our eyes to these connections between religion and the city in the present and in the past. And only such a look back, I argue, opens up to urban and religious actors, and that is to say to ourselves, the possibility of developing the new scenarios for the future, for negotiating coexistence, for urban planning, but also for religious action. Even though this book can only be a sketch, it makes it clear that what is addressed in the academic discussion as urban religion is neither a survival from the deep past, nor a contemporary accident of globalized modernity, let's say. Let me to give you a short idea of the book before we start into the critique. Again, admit that the book does not intend to provide and does not provide a coherent history. It tries to show different perspectives on this, if you like, entangled history of city and religion. And for this very reason, it does not focus on the monumental temples and public processions that have figured so large in histories of ancient religion. Rather, it looks for traces of mutual influence in philosophical treatises, Marcus Tullius Cicero, for example, or in lexicographic studies of Marcus Terenzio Varro, for example. It examines, and this is biographically one of my starting points, religious individualization precisely as an urban phenomenon. And it also asks about the role of small place-based communities of neighborhoods in big cities. Now, I'm quite aware that Rome is both a good and a bad example for such an enterprise. It's a good example because it offers so fantastic sources, and the unusual size predestine it for such a research. It is not a coincidence that Fustel de Coulanges, this ancient historian, and in a way the beginning of urban studies in the 19th century, began his urban research with an analysis of Athens and then especially of Rome. And I still find it's worth a closer look taking at that. However, I also realize and have encountered that an argumentation based on Rome triggers easily objections. So the objections is that all the alleged developments are typical only for big cities, only for metropolises. And certainly this is not an absurd assumption. If you think just about texts from Gospels, theological texts, philosophical texts in Greek, in Latin, in other languages, but also in terms of new religion, if we think of Mithraicism, I mean, many of these happened in the city of Rome. But nevertheless, I would claim that, narrowing the focus on metropolises is a dead end. And we experienced, we started originally from this notion and experienced this when we organized a conference with this focus in 2016. I can only say damage makes you wise, to use this dialectics of learning and research again. Now, why is it a dead end? The spatial turn did not consist of a mere shift of interest from time to space. The central insight was that space is to be understood as socially constituted space. And of course, a wall, no matter who built it, prevents you from moving on. But in general, walls are built for the purpose of preventing you from walking through them. So, and again, if you feel comfortable in a space because you have had good experiences there, or because it reminds you of another similar space where you had such good experiences, that there is this, you are part of, you are not just a victim of this social construction, but we are all constructing space by ourselves, by loading it with memories, by moving through it, by sitting down in a lecture hall, and so on. So religious practices and ideas do not simply react to masses of stone or large empty spaces, but they change and allow themselves to be changed from walls that are, for instance, understood as city boundaries, so city walls, and they allow themselves to be changed by squares that are seen as marketplaces or processional spaces, and not by the sheer existence of some physical space. And this type of urbanity, this type of engagement with space is not limited to big cities. Of course, we all know, and some or even many of us will have experienced, at least certainly those who came to Erfurt, that, living in a smaller town is not as colorful, and even religious options are certainly limited. But even in these smaller places, people are aware that they live in a city, that they are not in the countryside, that they are not in the wilderness. So this is the reason for this attempt to conceptually speak of religion and urbanity rather than religion and city. And so in English, you have this city-town problem, always suggesting, something big and something small. So I'm quite aware that I guess in English in particular, urbanity is not a perfect term, and seems to carry this notion of arrogance, which is part in a way of being an urbanite. But this is not the kernel of what I mean. But it's this consciousness of being part of such a complex bounded unity. Now, let me quickly end with just pointing out one further term, and this is the title term of the whole book, this urban religion. I mean, if you read the present literature, above all from sociologists, even from sociologists of religion, urban religion is simply a catch-all term for religious practices in cities, and specifically those practices that are seen as new, different, and outside of the major religious traditions and organized religion. And historically, as a consequence, you can't even use this. I mean, these people don't use the term for historical periods, because it's this very idea. You have traditional religion, and now in this huge cities and with global migration, you know, this new urban religion comes into being. But in order to use this term, which I find, you know, nice and short, nevertheless, for historical description, I take it as an analytic term and a term denoting a process. So this is not describing phenomena, but it's describing processes of change, how religion is changed in urban environments. Variety, diversity, religious plurality, the presence of religious groups that see themselves or are seen as minorities. I mean, all of this then are religious facts, but also are facts and coloring, defining the urbanity in such a place. So religion and religiosity are part of urbanity, as religion is reflecting about a city, about urbanity. And I mean, the cover design, this Tower of Babel, I think is a very good reminder that very often the take of religion onto cities has been quite a critical one. And this might be one of the reasons why historically this very shaping and positive engagement of cities with religion and religion with cities has not been in the focus of historical interest. But I hope very much that, I mean, our discussion will give some incentives to bring about a change here. So thank you very much for listening to me after you had already taken all the time to read the thing. But now it's my turn to be quiet, stop talking here and listening to your questions. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.
Thank you so much, Professor. So people are asking me to read what you just said in Portuguese. And since we are recording and it's going to stay at the YouTube channel, so I find it be useful for a broader audience here in the country. So I'll just read exactly the text you sent me, okay? Okay. So, então, eu vou agora ler de novo para vocês, né, em português, a tradução da fala do professor Rüpke. Deixe-me começar agradecendo a todos vocês por seu interesse no livro e no tema de minha pesquisa. Como devem saber, sou um historiador da religião, com foco no antigo mundo mediterrâneo e na religião de Roma e dos romanos em particular. Talvez não seja sem interesse se eu esboçar um pouco o caminho intelectual que leva ao presente livro, até porque não se trata de uma genealogia genial de ideias, mas sim de uma história de tentativa e erro, avançando na primeira direção e na segunda oposta. Talvez isso seja encorajador para os estudiosos mais jovens, que estão ouvindo agora aqui essa fala. Se me perdoarem por um comentário paternalista. Comecei minha trajetória de pesquisa investigando a Guerra Romana. Isto foi publicado recentemente em uma tradução revisada em inglês como Peace and War in Ancient Rome, Paz e Guerra na Roma Antiga. Foi uma análise de rituais e crenças por generais, soldados, habitantes de Roma, antes, durante e depois de uma campanha militar. Assim, era sobretudo, o livro trata sobretudo de uma análise de rituais. No entanto, sua descoberta mais importante foi outra. Ela se reflete no título latino do original alemão, Domi Militiae. Eu não tinha ouvido falar sequer da virada espacial em 1990, quando essa pesquisa foi feita, mas as evidências apontavam para uma construção cultural interessante. Mesmo e especialmente durante a guerra, a própria cidade de Roma foi construída como um lugar pacífico, um lugar de paz. Paz e guerra não eram conceitos temporais, mas sim espaciais. A guerra acontece do lado de fora de Roma. Roma, o local de paz. Infelizmente, eu não dei seguimento ao último, a essa ideia do espaço. E me mantive no primeiro, que é a pesquisa temporal, fazendo, então, pesquisas sobre o calendário romano. Somente no final da década, voltaram aos meus interesses as questões espaciais, quando tive o privilégio de liderar um grande grupo nacional de pesquisa, investigando o que chamamos, que foi chamado à época, de processos de globalização e regionalização na história da religião antiga. Partimos da ideia, então, profundamente arraigada, de que a religião antiga era uma forma dissimulada de política e expressão de coletividade, mesmo que complexas identidades de cidades-estado, por exemplo, dali emergissem. Se isso era verdade, deve ter havido um correlato religioso na formação de um Estado imperial, cada vez mais territorial, como vai ser o de Roma, o Imperium Romanum. No entanto, ficamos muito surpresos com as descobertas que as pesquisas geraram. Não havia nem uma religião imperial, nem mesmo uma religião provincial, apesar de todos os processos de difusão e de amálgama. O culto imperial era um bom meio de comunicação e de autoafirmação das elites locais, mas muitas vezes era a integração datada de uma cidade ou território no Império Romano, às vezes por séculos. Então, essa comunicação das elites acontecia muito tempo depois da chegada dos romanos. Ficamos um pouco chocados com a constatação de que tínhamos escolhido a religião imperial e provincial como título do projeto. Mas quando nossos resultados se consolidaram, tínhamos chegado ao fim de um período de financiamento, então encerramos a pesquisa aí. Neste contexto, o foco da pesquisa teve que ser deslocado de novo, e novamente não se aprofundou, mas perdeu o foco espacial. Com a ajuda de um sociólogo, elaborei um projeto grande, comparativo, transcultural, investigando as opções religiosas dos indivíduos em culturas supostamente coletivas. Então, de novo, o professor está colocando que, mais uma vez, ao longo das pesquisas dele, ele percebeu que a questão espacial era muito importante, mas ainda não tinha chegado o momento, vamos dizer assim, ou mesmo o amadurecimento para ir olhar para o espaço, que é já dando um spoiler, que é o que está no livro, que a gente vai debater daqui a pouco. Então, esse novo projeto investigava as opções religiosas dos indivíduos em culturas supostamente coletivas, ou seja, já está dialogando com o que ele, muito, entre aspas, coloca como o fracasso do projeto anterior, de ter percebido que não existe essa religião oficial. Então, o título desse projeto foi Individualização Religiosa em Perspectiva Histórica. E a importância e validade dessa perspectiva foi totalmente bem-sucedida, a partir de um subprojeto que é o que foi denominado Religião Antiga Vivida, né? Então, que é um conceito, hoje em dia, muito importante. Então, que o professor Rüpke esteve à frente do seu desenvolvimento. Então, quando eu falei no início da apresentação, né, da importância dele como um pensador que está, de fato, nos levando a novas abordagens para olhar o mundo antigo, é o Ancient Lived Religion. Né? Então, quem for fazer uma busca na internet vai, né, perceber que é uma abordagem, hoje em dia, muito importante, que saiu, então, desse projeto. Né? Sua principal contribuição foi mostrar que temos que nos despedir da ideia de que o conceito de polis, ou religião cívica, oferecia a melhor e mais abrangente maneira de analisar e descrever a religião antiga. Em vez disso, era possível localizar a própria ideia e prática de uma religião pública baseada em regras e normativas em uma grande escala de opções religiosas. Estas eram informadas tanto por iniciativas individuais quanto por processos de formação de grupos entre ou contra as elites locais. Estou muito satisfeita até hoje com importantes resultados do projeto, que renderam inúmeros artigos, não só de membros do grupo, como de pesquisadores de fora do grupo, e que, mais especificamente, levou à escrita pelo professor Rüpke, do livro Pantheon, uma nova história da religião romana. Panteão, né? Panteão. Uma nova história da religião romana. E ainda assim, ao concluir este projeto, por esta altura estou ciente que vocês já devem estar aborrecidos, não estamos. E ainda assim, ao concluir este projeto, percebi que tal criatividade e formação de grupos no uso político da religião, bem como o uso privatizado ou até mesmo orientado à segregação da religião, aconteceram dentro de um claro locus espacial, que é a cidade. Então, a gente volta para a questão do espaço, né, pela terceira vez. Em 2016, consegui inserir pelo menos essa ideia, né, da cidade na introdução a uma nova edição do Panteão, e comecei a buscar financiamento para seguir esta perspectiva. De novo, no formato amplo e comparativo. Não foi fácil encontrar financiamento, mas foi fácil encontrar co-investigadores. A religião e a cidade têm uma relação um com o outro e nos desafiam. Em primeiro lugar, todos nós somos, em certo sentido, urbanos ou não urbanos conscientes. Então, por um lado, somos isso. Por outro lado, temos uma relação positiva ou negativa com a religião. Então, isso inclui os religiosos, os espiritualmente interessados, das mais variadas tonalidades, pessoas que só fazem religião ocasionalmente. Aqui é o famoso brasileiro, professor Rüpke. Here in Brazil, the Catholics, they call themselves, I am Catholic, but I don't practice. A non-practicant Catholic, you know, so it's very deep inside our society, this idea of, né, católico não praticante. Então, é bem isso, né? Os que só fazem religião ocasionalmente. Os não religiosos e até os anti-religiosos. Uma retrospectiva histórica profunda parece mostrar que ambos os papéis, sendo urbanos e religiosos, estavam tão intimamente ligados que deveríamos formular um projeto para o futuro, não apenas como acadêmicos, mas também como cidadãos, com esta consciência e conhecimento do passado. É claro que todos devem discutir sobre o conteúdo deste esboço. Em termos normativos, este autor, em seu papel na história da religião, é quase apenas um observador. E esta é a minha observação inicial. As cidades do presente estão alterando a religião de forma muito ampla e muito distinta. Lugares de práticas religiosas tradicionais tornam-se herança cultural, patrimônio cultural. As práticas religiosas se estabelecem em zonas de pedestres, nos quintais das casas. As organizações religiosas fornecem serviços e infraestruturas urbanas, desde jardins de infância até lares de idosos. Os cinemas tornam-se espaços de experiência religiosa. Os grupos religiosos entram em alianças, as identidades religiosas tornam possível o distanciamento da maioria, o que de outra forma dificilmente é possível no mundo da vida em rede. Tais mudanças não são novas, mas são uma característica básica da religião urbana. A religião sempre foi o motor e a vítima, o modelador e o superveniente da cidade. Como é que tá? Bom, mas enfim, né? A religião está ali presente, modelando, mas também sendo modelada. O que a religião parece ser hoje, em suas várias formas organizacionais, sua diversidade, a questão da espiritualidade individual e também o seu uso pelo Estado, é em grande parte o resultado deste processo. Isso é verdade, eu diria, tanto na China como no Brasil, no norte da Europa como na Austrália. E, inversamente, essas novas práticas e ideias religiosas moldaram o espaço urbano, a convivência urbana e as ideias de urbanidade dentro e fora das cidades. E isso também é verdade em todos os lugares, embora em alguns graus diferentes e de formas muito diferentes. O livro, então, Religião Urbana, não fornece uma análise histórica global ou abrangente. Ao invés disso, ele usa exemplos de urbanização antiga para abrir nossos olhos para as conexões entre a religião e a cidade no presente e no passado. Olhando para trás, eu argumento sobre os atores urbanos e religiosos. E então, para a possibilidade de desenvolver novos cenários para o nosso futuro, para negociar a nossa coexistência, para o planejamento urbano e para a nossa ação religiosa. Embora o livro só possa ser um esboço, o esboço deixa claro que o que é tratado na discussão acadêmica como religião urbana não é nem uma sobrevivência pré-moderna, nem um acidente contemporâneo da modernidade globalizada. O livro, então, não fornece uma história coerente, ao contrário, ele tenta mostrar perspectivas diferentes sobre a história enredada da cidade e da religião. Por esta razão, não se concentra em templos monumentais ou procissões públicas. Ao contrário, procura traços da influência mútua em tratados filosóficos, em Marcos Túlio Cícero, por exemplo, ou nos estudos lexicográficos de Marcos Terêncius Varrão, né, e Cícero. Ele examina, que é um dos meus pontos de partida, a individualização religiosa precisamente como um fenômeno urbano, e pergunta sobre o papel das comunidades pequenas, baseadas no lugar, ou seja, os bairros, na grande cidade. Tudo bem. Roma, estou ciente disso, é tanto um bom quanto um mau exemplo. Suas boas fontes, e a quantidade de documentação e o seu tamanho, que é em comum, a predestinam para tais pesquisas. Então, não é à toa, né, que Fustel de Coulanges começa a sua pesquisa urbana com uma análise de Atenas e especialmente de Roma. E ainda encontra um olhar mais atento ao seu trabalho esclarecedor. Né? O Fustel ainda hoje é importante. No entanto, a argumentação baseada em Roma também desencadeia facilmente uma objeção. Os supostos desenvolvimentos são típicos apenas para as grandes cidades, para as metrópoles. Essa suposição não é absurda. Textos importantes, talvez até a maioria dos evangelhos cristãos, tiveram origem aqui, em Roma. Novas religiões, talvez o culto a Mitra, também teriam sido fundadas em Roma. E ainda assim, a hipótese de religião em metrópole é um beco sem saída. Nós mesmos experimentamos isso quando organizamos uma conferência com este foco em 2016. Por que um beco sem saída? A volta espacial não consistiu em uma mera mudança de interesse do tempo para o espaço. A percepção central era que o espaço deve ser entendido como espaço socialmente constituído. É claro, um muro, não importa quem o construiu, impede que você siga em frente. Mas, em geral, as paredes são construídas com o propósito de impedir que você as atravesse. Por outro lado, você se sente confortável em um espaço, porque teve boas experiências lá, ou porque ele o faz lembrar de outro espaço semelhante, onde você teve boas experiências. As práticas e ideias religiosas não reagem simplesmente à massa de pedra ou grandes espaços vazios, mas mudam e se permitem ser trocados por muros que são entendidos como limites da cidade, muros da cidade de fato, e ser trocados por praças que são vistas como mercados ou espaços de procissão. Esta urbanidade, no entanto, não caracteriza apenas as grandes cidades. É claro que a vida nas cidades pequenas não é tão colorida e as opções religiosas são mais limitadas. Ainda assim, aqui também muitos estão conscientes de que vivem em uma cidade e não no campo, ou mesmo no deserto. Daí o esclarecimento conceitual em usar o termo religião e urbanidade em vez de religião e cidade. Estou muito claro, né, para ele é muito claro que a urbanidade não carrega o significado por si só, mas às vezes é preciso definir e usar esses termos para, fugindo, né, de uma linguagem cotidiana, evitar outros mal-entendidos. Bom, o mesmo se aplica, embora num sentido diferente, à religião urbana. Nos estudos das cidades contemporâneas, a religião urbana é simplesmente um termo de engate para práticas religiosas nas cidades, especificamente aquelas práticas que são vistas como novas, diferentes e fora das principais tradições religiosas e da religião organizada. Historicamente, há pouco a ser feito com tal termo, especialmente se alguém afirmar, como eu, que estas supostamente novas práticas não são tão novas assim. E é por isso que proponho usar a religião urbana como um termo analítico, de processo. A religião urbana não é este sacrifício ou aquela procissão que ocorre em uma cidade, mas é a religião vista da perspectiva de mudança por meio da urbanidade e a sua mudança na urbanidade. Variedade, diversidade e especialmente a pluralidade religiosa e a presença de grupos religiosos que são vistos ou se veem como minorias é historicamente parte da prática e da ideia de cidade. Religião e religiosidade fazem parte da urbanidade, das ideias e modalidades de convivência na cidade e na própria cidade. E a religião, como indica a Torre de Babel da capa, né, do livro, é uma das formas mais importantes e antigas de pensar a cidade. Não quero exagerar, a religião urbana é um tema de pesquisa como outros, tais como guerra e paz, calendários, religião imperial, individualização ou religião vivida. Mas é também um tópico de pesquisa que está intimamente relacionado com a realidade das nossas vidas, como vivemos nas cidades e como temos que mudar as cidades para que elas atendam o que nós desejamos. A urbanidade em uma palavra. E isso também deve encontrar um bom lugar para a religião se quisermos viver juntos nas cidades. So, Professor, again, thank you so much. And now I open the floor to Adrienne.
Eu agradeço, Cristina, o convite para a gente estar aqui discutindo o livro do professor Rüpke. Foi realmente uma honra poder estar aqui, é um prazer imenso, e especialmente ler o livro é um grande prazer. A gente vê realmente como nessa obra, como o professor falou, a Cristina também, na verdade sintetiza toda uma trajetória de pesquisa na área de história da religião. Então, aqui tem o cumulativo todo das suas ideias e de como elas foram tomando forma, na verdade, ao longo do tempo, e aqui se consolidam nos estudos espaciais, né? Então, é extremamente interessante ver como as questões lançadas por ele nessa obra têm a ver com os debates que a gente vem realizando, vocês aí no LARP, no Labeca, a gente aqui no Rio, no Nereida, também já na minha formação a gente tinha lá no LIA, né? Então algumas referências que aqui são instrumentais, como o Marc e o G foram também instrumentais na minha própria formação, né? Então isso é muito interessante da gente ver, e interessante como que isso vem contribuindo, dentro do que a gente vem analisando para os estudos espaciais, mas também para os estudos de emaranhamento e de ritualização, aqui pelo professor, trabalhados como sacralização, né? Eu mesma tenho trabalhado com ritualização da paisagem, a construção das experiências das comunidades da Idade do Ferro, meus colegas no Nereida trabalhando com as experiências dos politeísmos nas sociedades antigas. Então, é o caminho de trabalho que a gente também compartilha, né? Pensar a cidade é, sem sombra de dúvidas, pensar mais do que seus prédios e muros. Precisamos considerar as diferentes formas de relacionamento e identificação em sua vivência. É pensar como nós construímos esses relacionamentos nesse ambiente construído e com esse ambiente construído, como nos colocamos ante ele. Então, concordo plenamente que a experiência da cidade promove, amplia e altera esses fenômenos e por eles também é modificada, sobretudo no caso daquelas que são articuladoras de redes e que constituem hubs de circuitos de informação. É nesse caminho que a gente está hoje dentro do projeto do Nereida. A abordagem do livro desenvolve as novas propostas de abordagem do agenciamento, pensando a religião a partir da urbanidade, da experiência cotidiana da cidade, o que, em termos de localização, permite tanto compreender a heterogeneidade local, quanto os deslocamentos e as transformações socioculturais promovidas pela globalização. O conceito de emaranhamento nos abriu novas perspectivas de análise, dando-nos instrumento intelectual para compreendermos as transformações engendradas pelos deslocamentos culturais e geográficos, bem como pelas ações individuais. Em uma certa medida, ele mudou como nos aproximamos e apreendemos a materialidade, destacando sua formação ante o tempo, sua transformação ante o tempo, e as formas de sociabilidade. Mas o que me fascinou na sua abordagem é que você demonstrou como podemos pensar dessa mesma maneira o imaterial, que ganha forma pela circulação da população no espaço urbano. Eu tenho um particular interesse nesse tópico e em como podemos aprofundá-lo. Você considera que em simulações de circulação, como os atuais estudos de sintaxe espacial com aplicações computacionais, podem nos ajudar nesse sentido? Ou que outros caminhos se pode abrir?
Again, obrigado. Thank you very much for this, intensive and thoughtful and critical reading of the book. And I must say, so thanks also for providing me with an English translation of your critique and questions. Now to keep this short in a question and answer way and not to expand and continue my lengthy and doubled monologue of just a few minutes ago, perhaps I simply focus on a few items and then we can see how we move on from
sorry, Professor?
that.
Sorry, just because people asked Adrienne stopped at the first comment. So that you know what you know. So I don't know, maybe if you prefer that she reads to everybody the whole thing so you can answer as a global?
I mean, these are different questions, so we can go
okay.
one by one.
So we are at the first one about
so the question of
spatial syntax and the circulation and the movement inside the city.
I think, thank you very much. That, I mean, this is above all a question of methodology, as I understood it. And I think that is a point where I can, I mean, there is a lot of interest in what I see in archaeology of the ancient world, but also beyond, to get closer to the, let's say, spatial experience of people. And one of the ways is to sort of digitally, I mean, three-dimensional reconstruct places and try to think about roots and movement of people that are attested in, be it in texts or due to certain traces, or you see that certain surfaces are worn, etc. I mean, you all know this much better than I do. I think this is a good, so I think that is great, a great methodology to at least, I mean, to have an idea of what people might have experienced. I mean, I guess one of the truisms of dealing with reaction of people, that it's very difficult to say what an individual really experienced, you know, who came from someplace else or is looking forward to, I don't know, the marriage of her son, or the funerary of her aunt, or whatsoever. I mean, this would of course shape minds, even if they walk together in a larger group in a procession. Now, nevertheless, I think this is a viable way to construct probabilities of what people experience. Now, I think I'm interested in that only insofar as the element of the urban comes into. So if we take this to be, you know, let us say a religious procession, so the question is where the element of the urban comes into play, which typically, I mean, is a reflection about the classification, let us say, an appreciation of monumentality, of the labor investment, of the luxuriousness of surfaces, of the participation of important figures in the city, and so that it is often. So I think it's a good methodological starting point, but we need to bring in further materials, which is often certainly textual materials, so to not leave this spatial syntax a purely descriptive methodology. Yeah, so texts come in here, and it would also be interesting to see. I mean, I take urbanity and the urban as pointing to the fact. I mean, the urban is a huge mass of overlapping spaces of different extensions. So it's above all the reflection. I mean, if you imagine the reconstruction of so a processional route, I now take as an example, on a map, that in a way this space, processional space, is embedded in larger spaces that are not necessarily visible, might be, and access of visibility to construct is one of the enterprises here. But to keep this in mind for an analysis of urban religion, how these awareness of this embedded or embeddedness or overlapping of spaces forms part of this experience. I mean, in our research group, we have used this geographical term of co-speciality. So to think about overlapping spaces, but also to think how these are connected in people's mind. And of course, that is an interpretive move that needs some evidence, which is often, but not necessarily, textual evidence. But let us say the changing. So if you don't have contemporary synchronic evidence, you might draw your conclusion on the basis of changes. So diachronic analysis, how are roots shaped, what is changing in facades or in the, the ground trodden, what are objects that are carried along, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it has a lot of potential to bring that up. And I will read it in português. O ponto central do seu argumento é como a performance e a comunicação religiosas, na forma de preces, cantos, gestos e oferendas, transformam a experiência da cidade e são igualmente por elas transformadas, né? Ligando justamente com o que você estava falando agora ainda, do que é carregado nessa procissão, o que é usado, como se dá essa interação da procissão. A Humphrey e o Laidlaw, em 94, nos chamaram a atenção para a dissociação entre forma e propósito na ação ritual, sendo o propósito construído como explicação posterior ao ato em si, o que, na minha perspectiva, é extremamente pertinente para práticas rituais pré-históricas. No seu entender, isso também se aplica à comunicação e às performances religiosas urbanas antigas, especialmente por caso de Roma?
I think ritualization as initially developed by Laidlaw and Humphrey, I mean on Latin American material, is one of my key notions for dealing with ritual. I have to say that at the same time, my take on human agency and acting has somewhat a pragmatistic background. So I analyze acting as under the perspective of problem solving. So I think there is also in ritual acting, it's not just playing around and afterwards you are asked to account for it. Of course, I mean there is a lot of tech or a lot of discourse about ritual. So indigenous emic discourse is about a post factum interpretation, and might not be, or is in many instances quite different from what those who perform, who are doing this, think or think not. So I think that I think that is helpful to if you agree that there is an intention involved in ritual action, an intention of communication, an intention of transformation that might not be explicitly justified by those who are doing this. But what they do, I mean, they try to communicate to, dead ancestors or divine powers. They try to transform a situation, also the materiality of a situation. Objects are certainly important. And all of this has at the same time a sort of performative dimension. And here I think this ritualization, which I basically take as, acting differently from pragmatic everyday action, comes in. And that is, I think this is an analytical perspective which is helpful for many ritual practices in the ancient Mediterranean world, in Roman religion, and beyond. And again, what then is called pontifical interpretations and so on. I mean, there is a lot of antiquarian later then attempt at rationalizing such activities. Does this answer your question? It
does. I totally agree. And also in the text you get some sort of political uses as well of religion and of ritual acts in this sense, isn't it? They create different meanings from those that people had when performing the acts as well. So I find it quite helpful in a way, in order to break our analysis in different levels of usage and apprehension as well. Might help us to go further, I don't know, in a sense. Em trabalhos anteriores, você desenvolveu a ação do self, da individuação nas práticas religiosas. A cultura material é particularmente apropriada para traçar a vasta gama de individualizações nas práticas votivas e que também cabem no estudo das mudanças engendradas pela dinâmica local. Em se tratando da materialidade do ambiente construído, essas individualizações estariam somente nas residências e nos pequenos altares em espaços públicos, como aqueles dos lares com detalhes por você citados, ou dos altares de rua, que também temos, no caso de cidades gregas antigas, como Massália, por exemplo, ou também podemos encontrá-las em outras formas. Ou a construção da individuação é desafio que nos escapa?
Yeah, I think for once I can be shorter on that question. When I'm in previous works, even more I'm focusing on, this, let us say, small scale evidence. I mean, this is of course also, let us say, a polemical move against focusing just on the agency of Roman emperors, for instance. But I mean, it's quite clear that also the size of the investment, the massiveness of the materiality, the monumentality, accompanied also by the ability to mobilize a lot of people and to communicate about this in the form of literary texts or inscriptions, gives power figures, advantages. So, I mean, nobody doubts the, let us say, individuality of a Roman emperor. I mean, my point is to say that we should see this qualitatively, simply on the same level. I mean, even if your chances to get response, to influence the behavior of others, to create a fashion, are much higher if you on top of the social hierarchy. In a way, we and this is what we can observe, a lot of independent formations of small groups or even individual heretic actors, and I think this, let us say, this ubiquity of heresy and the enormous consequences of networked heresy below and against, these formal power structures is very important. And I mean, this is, important for our understanding of religious change. But above all, cities are a unique place for that, because due to this complexity and density and multiplicity of actors, there's much more potential in a way for hiding and doing your own thing. But of course, at the same time, if you try to manage this, administrate, rule such an unruly place, of course, you must also pour enormous efforts and amounts of resources with a subsequent materiality of this into cities. And I mean, that's why they are so complex and ambivalent, if you like, places.
And it helps also to work with the heterotopias that you identify as well. It helps us to keep in mind that we have these overlapping understanding of spaces at work all at the same time. And related also to this, ao mesmo tempo em que você lança as bases para atentarmos para a criação de lugares, tanto nos processos de urbanização quanto de desenvolvimento urbano, você argumenta que devemos dar lugar ao não lugar. Ao pensarmos a experiência urbana, o que pode nos abrir novas frentes de reflexão, integrando espaços vividos e concebidos. Isso porque no seu texto, o não lugar não é somente constituído de espaços vazios ou lugares de passagem. O não lugar não somente é mas também, ao que me parece, também pode ser aplicado a lugares de transcendência, ou seja, lugares que não constam em si no espaço urbano, que os transcendem e, ao mesmo tempo que a eles são correlacionados. É possível ampliar essa noção na análise do ambiente construído, reunindo assim o visível e o invisível, o material e o imaterial?
Yes. Thank you very much. I mean, you're pointing also to an omission in that book. I mean, on the one hand, I use this term of non-place going back to Marc Augé, but in fact, I mean, the more powerful use is in a way more hidden in what I frequently call beyond. And I mean, that is what you are now unpacking. And so thank you very much for this. Perhaps just one short remark. In spatial analysis of religion, it's often stressed that you know, if you think of Thomas Tweed, crossing and dwelling, and dwelling and crossing, you know, this dwelling as rooting oneself in a place and clinging to a place. So, you know, if you have a house and garden, and so if you bury your ancestors in the garden, yeah, I mean, you establish a link to that place that is nearly indestructible, so to speak. But what I try to stress is, and what you are now rightly, and I'm grateful for your sympathy on that, is that in a way it's a sort of, you know, it's not just connecting to this place, but it's in a way a deep place, or I mean, going beyond, which can, it's opening up an urban space and also other spaces, but especially in this, you know, urban boundedness, and also, I mean, which creates a security. It's a sort of opening up, you know, this sort of transcendency and going. I mean, often the ancestors, mostly the gods, are somehow beyond. I mean, not in a, let us say, modern elaborate Christian sense of, or also Muslim theology, you know, sense of transcendence, but, you know, in a very concrete spatial sense of, you know, this goddess is coming from Cyprus, or from Sicily or whatsoever. I mean, but it's beyond the city walls. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And in a sense, you're also going to my other question, which is, e na sua opinião, nas cidades antigas, o não lugar também contribui para a construção de identidades? Em que medida? So, does it help also to develop further these ideas of identities within the urban space?
Yeah.
Or no?
No. I mean, I'm a bit reluctant to immediately answer, because I'm reluctant to use the term identity, which is so often used as, you know, in the sense of, you know, fixed identities, and in a way projecting the 19th and 20th, and in a way one has to say, unfortunately, 21st century idea of national identities, you know, into the past. So I think it's rather helping to understand the vagueness and the precariousness of identities and the multiplicity of identities that religion, I mean, helps to undercut, because it's, bringing this divine element into it, or the agency of the material is sort of undercutting the stability of established social hierarchies. So it's a dynamizing element. Yeah, perhaps I simply stop.
No, I do agree. It's a process of identification more, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And then creating a proper identity. And also because there are so many and they are overlapping as well. And that's why they are so difficult to translate to our modern language. And it's usually a topic that the students have some difficulty in grasping because it's so different from ours, in a sense.
Yeah.
And this also goes to my last question. Ao fazer balanço sobre os estudos do espaço, você menciona o trabalho de Sawyer como, mas prefere adotar a abordagem de Lefebvre. Entretanto, a sua noção de densidade da cidade me pareceu muito próxima daquela de dinâmica da cidade, de Sawyer, para quem ela é o estímulo da aglomeração urbana, uma vez que é um processo em si da experiência humana no ambiente urbano e porque é transformadora. Concordo que, em termos de antiguidade, dependendo do recorte cronológico que se considere, não temos como traçar a dialética do espaço por ele proposta, sobretudo diante da documentação de que dispomos. Mas, ainda assim, haveria contextos em que a abordagem de Sawyer nos permitiria lidar com diferentes usos e níveis de percepções espaciais? Ou, na sua opinião, essa abordagem só pode ser aplicada a contextos de desigualdade, de conflito, de colonização?
Yeah, I mean that is a question that I have not fully reflected before. I must say, I think it's my reluctance to bring Edward Sawyer so much to the fore is related to two things. I mean, the one is that. I still find Foucault's heterotopia a useful concept that in a way is a bit easier than Edward Sawyer's trialectics to handle. The other thing is in a way, I think this idea of first, second, third space, I mean, which is not exactly mapping espace, what is it, conçu, perçu, vécu, of Lefebvre. I think that is very helpful to classify or try to classify how people think about space, how they are making maps, how they are deconstruing maps, also then administrative maps put into administrative realities and so on. I think here a sort of historical difference comes in. I think in a way, when looking onto 20th and 21st century cities, these American analysts typically think about, there is a city, there is the people, powerful and less powerful people, and the more powerful are often very close to a city administration. And the city administration is close to urban planners, which by their professional ethos are fully independent of the city administration and should, listen to the people. But in fact, it's, it's sort of, it's difficult to disentangle I mean, also for us analytically, but for the historical agents. Now, if we look into pre-modern cities, there are certainly the people, and stratification is certainly as producing as much unequalness as today. But I mean, there is. City administration is very, very low. I mean, it's not powerful. And formal planning is also, I mean, it's rather a business of intellectuals, like, let us say, Plato or so, who write about how the ideal city should be. But this is never made by any mayor of Athens, into a new street grid or whatsoever. So for that reason, I must say, I mean, me, reflecting what others in our group have developed, I'm very intrigued by this notion, Crumley's notion of heterarchy. So rather, think in terms of, there, in a way, there is first, second, third space urban agents and first, second, third space religious agents. So, and you sort of, if you try to crisscross them, I mean, then it's easier to think in terms of agendas, of groups that are not fully ranked, but in a hierarchical situation. And I think for this very reason, in a way, the analytical necessity of taking this Socian epistemology not into the foreground. That might be let's say, an excuse explanation for that.
Thank you so much. No, it's very helpful. Also, because we can, in this sense, with the concept of hierarchy, we can actually grasp the disputes of space as well, and how different groups have different apprehensions and different usage, and can develop further on it. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure, and even more to read your book.
Thank you.
Cristina?
Sou eu. Acabei de ter uma ideia. Uma ideia que está me parecendo brilhante. Eu esqueço que vai ficar gravado para a eternidade. A ideia é a seguinte, depois a gente vai pegar com cuidado e vamos passar para o papel, como se fosse uma entrevista, e publicar essa conversa na nossa revista, na revista do Museu de Arqueologia e Etnologia, porque é extremamente interessante, toca em tópicos, né, que nós estamos discutindo o tempo todo.
Todos nós.
E então, so I'm translating to Professor Rüpke. I had an idea while you were talking of afterwards we'll take the exchange of ideas here and transform it into a written text as an interview, as if you were interviewed, because and I want to publish in our journal. The journal from the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, because it's very, very interesting for us, Professor. It really touches subjects that we deal with
every day
on a constant basis, dealing with our students and their projects. So I think it would be really, really interesting, besides having it on the YouTube, to have it translated and published. So of course, if you all allow me, all the participants, and with that, people who are listening and maybe not grasping all the words, will be relieved because we'll publish it really soon. So I thank you both for now. Adrienne, thank you so much for your comments, and I immediately pass the word to Alessandro, so we won't get late. Okay, thank you.
Okay, boa tarde a todos. Good evening, Professor. Boa tarde a todos. Primeiramente, eu agradeço o convite da professora Cristina para esse evento. É uma grande honra estar aqui hoje, representando o Laboratório de Arqueologia Romana Provincial do Museu de Arqueologia e Etnologia da Universidade de São Paulo. Antes de mais nada, eu gostaria de fazer uma pequena introdução, uma apresentação sobre o LARP e um dos seus eixos de pesquisa aqui envolvido nesse lançamento, que seria religião e práticas mortuárias no mundo romano. O Laboratório de Arqueologia Romana Provincial, o LARP, nasceu a partir de um grupo de estudos chamado Formas de Contato e Processos de Transformação no Mediterrâneo Antigo, Roma e suas províncias, liderado pela professora, doutora Maria Isabel Fleming, nossa querida Mabel. E a proposta de ampliação desse grupo de estudos permitiu a construção de um laboratório acadêmico sobre arqueologia romana aqui na Universidade de São Paulo, com auxílio e fomento da Fundação de Amparo à Pesquisa do Estado de São Paulo, a FAPESP. A criação do LARP possibilitou de forma mais consistente e estruturada o desenvolvimento das discussões que orientam as pesquisas de seus membros sobre as províncias romanas, como a Gália, a Espanha, a Palestina, a Britânia, o Egito e o norte da África, gerando novas questões envolvendo Roma e seu papel na área provincial. As pesquisas do laboratório pautam-se pelos debates em torno de temas vinculados ao imperialismo romano, como romanização, alteridade, identidade, religião e política, urbanismo, transformação dos espaços públicos, monumentalidade, práticas mortuárias, iconografia, espaço doméstico, tecnologia, produção e consumo, território e paisagem. O eixo de pesquisa Religião e Práticas Mortuárias pretende analisar contextos, artefatos e práticas mortuárias nos antigos territórios romanos, com o objetivo de articular a influência da religiosidade na materialidade e nos espaços. Das pesquisas do LARP sobre religião, procura-se acessar pelo registro material a trajetória religiosa e as práticas mortuárias como um aspecto relevante da ação constituidora da religiosidade e da identidade romana, e, consequentemente, das políticas de romanização. Nesse sentido, os trabalhos do professor Rüpke vêm sendo discutidos nos encontros do LARP por apresentarem uma abordagem inovadora da religião antiga como resultado e resultante de efeitos e usos específicos do espaço urbano, uma religião em formação. A obra do professor Rüpke nos permite, assim, ampliar a visão do elemento religioso como agente importante nos processos de urbanização no antigo mundo mediterrâneo. Compreendendo a religião como um ato comunicativo com agentes especiais, tal comunicação religiosa produz e depende da sacralização dos espaços, do tempo e do material, participando fortemente da formação do ambiente construído. A proposta de pesquisa do professor Rüpke sobre religião urbanizada, ou seja, uma religião alterada pela urbanidade, assim como uma urbanidade em que a religião é sedimentada, encaixa-se nos propósitos investigativos do LARP, quando buscamos, por meio das reminiscências materiais e simbólicas das províncias romanas, localizar e discutir o processo de romanização, cujo um dos pilares fundamentais era justamente o viver em cidades. A tradução para o português do livro Urban Religion, do professor Rüpke, permite a nós, pesquisadores brasileiros, interessados no antigo mundo mediterrâneo, ampliar nossa visão sobre o espaço religioso, como importante locus de pesquisa para se investigar a vida urbana antiga. Eu gostaria de propor algumas questões ao professor Rüpke. São 3 questões baseadas em minha leitura da obra, mas também em alguns pressupostos investigativos do LARP. Eu verso esse texto em inglês, faço a pergunta em português, já faço a pergunta em português. Acho que seria legal em inglês e depois a gente passa a pergunta para o português. Okay, so I'll speak in English now. Good evening, Professor Rüpke. My name is Alessandro Gregory. I have a master's degree in archaeology and a PhD in education from the Faculty of Education of the University of São Paulo. And I'm a member of the Roman Provincial Archaeology Laboratory, LARP, in Portuguese. And first,
I would like to thank Professor Comicchiari for inviting me to this event. It's a great honor representing today my colleagues of the Roman Provincial Archaeology Laboratory. I would like to make a brief presentation of LARP and one of its programs of research, religion, mortuary practices in Roman world. The laboratory was born from the study group Forms of Contact and Processes of Transformation in the Ancient Mediterranean, Rome and its provinces, led by Professor Maria Isabel Fleming. The proposed expansion of the group allowed the construction of an academic laboratory on Roman archaeology at the University of São Paulo, with the support of the State of São Paulo Research Foundation. The creation of LARP made possible, in a more consistent and structured way, the development of the discussions that guides the research of its members on the Roman provinces, such as Gaul, Hispania, Palestine, Britannia, Egypt, and North Africa, generating new questions involving Romans' role in the provincial area. The laboratory's research is guided by debates around themes linked to Roman imperialism, such as Romanization, identity, religion and politics, urbanism, transformation of public spaces, monumentality, mortuary practices, iconography, domestic space, technology, production and consumption, territory and landscape. The LARP's research program on religion and mortuary practices intended to analyze contexts, artifacts, and mortuary practice in the ancient Roman territories, with the aim of articulating the influence of religiosity on materiality and spaces. From LARP research on religion, we seek to access through the material record the religious trajectory as a relevant aspect of the constitutive action of Roman identity and consequently of Romanization policies. In this sense, Professor Rüpke's work have been discussed at LARP meetings because they present an innovative approach to ancient religion as a result and resultant of specific effects and uses of urban space, a religion in the making. Professor Rüpke's work allows us to broaden our vision of religion element as an important agent in the processes of urbanization in the ancient Mediterranean world. Understanding religion as a communicative act with special agents, as Professor Rüpke proposed, allows us to comprehend religion as a productor and a dependent on sacralization of space, time, and material. So religiosity participates actively in the formation of a building environment. Professor Rüpke's research proposal on urbanized religion, that is, a religion altered by urbanity, as well as an urbanity in which religion is sedimented, fits perfectly into the investigative proposals of LARP. Through the material and symbolic reminiscences of the lived religion in the Roman provinces, we are able to discuss the process of Romanization, which one of its fundamental aspects was living in the cities. The translation into Portuguese of Professor Rüpke's book, Urban Religion, allows us Brazilian researchers interested in the ancient Mediterranean world to expand our view on religion aspects as an important research problem of ancient urban life. Finally, I would like to make 3 questions to Professor Rüpke based on my reading of the book and on the archaeological research program of LARP. So, Professor, first question, your work is a great stimulus for all archaeologists interested in investigating and understanding the symbolic aspects of urban life in the Imperial Roman world. It is a provocative proposal which presents several concepts and terms to apprehend one of the fundamental characteristics of life in the urbanized ancient Mediterranean cities, the religiosities, in the plural indeed. However, Professor, the Roman power developed ambiguous relationship with the diversity of the religion in the city of Rome over time. Rome was never a totally free religious place, as common sense and sometimes popular culture encourage us to think. Examples cited in the book are the destruction of places of worship in the city, such as the Temple of Isis and Serapis, the regulation of rituals as bacchanalia, and even the banishment of peoples, astrologers, and philosophers from the city of Rome. I would like to ask you, Professor, in what sense religious control by the authorities of the city, especially by destroying the cult spaces, may be related to the idea of building an ideal city in the Roman world? In what sense this exclusion of places of worship could be related to an idea of building an ideal city in the Roman world? Is it possible to make this connection? Would I translate into Portuguese this question? I will translate this question in Portuguese to the audience first. So, eu perguntei para o professor Rüpke sobre a dinâmica de exclusão, destruição de espaços religiosos na cidade. Professor, seu trabalho é um grande estímulo para todos nós arqueólogos interessados em investigar e compreender os aspectos simbólicos da vida urbana no mundo imperial romano. É uma proposta provocadora, a qual apresenta diversos conceitos e termos para se aprender uma das características fundamentais da vida no Mediterrâneo antigo urbanizado, que são as religiosidades, no plural, né, de fato. Entretanto, o poder romano desenvolveu relações ambíguas com a diversidade das religiões na cidade de Roma ao longo do tempo. Roma nunca foi um lugar religioso totalmente livre, como a cultura popular nos encoraja a pensar. Exemplos citados no livro do professor Rüpke são as destruições de locais de culto na cidade de Roma, como templos de Isis e Serapis, a regulamentação de rituais, como o ritual da bacchanalia, e até banimentos de povos, astrólogos e filósofos da cidade de Roma. Gostaria de perguntar ao professor em que sentido o controle religioso por parte das autoridades da cidade, especialmente destruindo espaços de culto, pode estar relacionado à ideia de construção de um espaço ideal de cidade no mundo romano. Ok, professor?
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the background also of your research enterprises, and in the end you must answer my question for what this the abbreviation LARP is standing.
Okay.
But yeah, to come to your first question, I think that the quickest answer is no. I mean, there is a long speculation about whether the I mean, if you take Ciceronian texts, you might imagine something like an ideal concept where you have the Capitolium and the Capitoline Triad sort of at the top of the spiritual world, and likewise at the top of the Roman urban landscape, and exclude dangerous divinities, even like Mars, in Varro. So to have no fire, I mean, which is the greatest threat to the urban fabric out of the city. And I mean, this argument has often been shaped in the sense that, and this is based only on just one quotation, I mean, one passage in the Attic Nights of Aulus Gellius, that the Roman military camp is a sort of, mirror, the simplified mirror of this Roman ideal world. I think if we look at these, I was called leges municipales, city laws. I mean, whether this is also mostly from Hispania, the Iberian Peninsula. I mean, we are quite astonished to see how thin the layer of regulations is, and really just providing a sort of basic framework. So what I think is, I mean, one part of this is certainly that, you know, a very simple but important element, and this is this division of the world of the living, the city of the living, and the dead being, so to speak, suburban existences in a way. And I have argued in Pantheon, and yeah, would like to underline this, that I mean, in terms of religious innovativity and individual innovativity, it's above all cult of ancestors, so what you called practicas mortuarias, that are such an important field of you know, engagement with the spiritual, let's say broadly. So I'm always putting funerary practices and religion in. I don't think that I think our semantic differences are very problematic here. So to cut this short, I mean the Romans relied and had to rely, you know, in a world empire without electricity, telephone, and aircraft. They relied for their dominion on cities and the functioning of cities, and so the trick was rather to make city life attractive and Rome attractive for local elites. So, you know, to invite them, to open them careers, you know, and offer them a range of symbols from which they could choose. So would they prefer to do Jupiter or to do, you know, Divus Augustus, and rather to be very reluctant in cause of in the sense of direct control. But of course, if you question the epistemological superiority of the emperor, you know, with divination was a very precarious and sensible field here. So then control set in, but basically it's more about creating attractivity. And in a way, the paradox effect of this is that on the one hand, the Romans and cities accepted as cities by the Romans were extremely successful in doing this, being instruments of rule, but at the same time they were also, I mean, places of resistance, and in a way those places most resilient in the face of Roman dominion. So so the elites of Roman of cities in the Greek world, for instance, I mean, they had on the one hand the highest number of Roman citizens in their rank, but at the same time, you know, were the most Greek and non-Roman, sometimes even anti-Roman actors. So I think that is a sort of not always paradox, but a tension that perhaps is characteristic of cities in many instances.
Right, Professor. Thank you very much. It's a brilliant answer, and I think tension is the perfect word here. No, this tension between the Romans and the locals, the religions, are also a way to control, but also to discuss the space. So I think tension is the perfect word here. Thank you, Professor, for your answer. And I would like to explain the LARP. What does it mean? LARP is how we call our laboratory in Portuguese. It's abbreviation of Laboratório de Arqueologia Romana Provincial. In English, it should be Roman Provincial Archaeology Laboratory. So I think the abbreviation in English should be completely different. So LARP is how we call our laboratory here in Portuguese. Okay. Professor, second question about your book. Let's talk about urban religion and iconography. The visual aspect is extremely relevant when we observe the religions of ancient Mediterranean cities. To what extent did the image of a god or his iconographic repertoire allow a more efficient religious communication in the ancient city? Professor, making an image of a god or a hero visible on walls, altars, and passageways may be an efficient example of sacralizing that space. Em português, professor, eu gostaria de abordar nessa questão religião urbana e iconografia. O aspecto visual é algo extremamente relevante quando abordamos as religiões do Mediterrâneo antigo. Em que extensão a imagem do Deus ou seu repertório iconográfico permitiu uma comunicação religiosa mais eficiente? Tornar o Deus ou o herói visível em muros, altares e locais de passagem na cidade pode ser um exemplo eficiente de sacralização do espaço? Okay, professor, your answer, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, that I think is in terms of the change of religion, one of the most important contributions of cities. So this, I mean, giving divine powers a shape, not necessarily, but often an anthropomorphic shape. But that is not the. But giving a shape is the first important element. And now, in a way, this is implied in the materiality of this iconography. And let me here between Lefebvre and Soja also talk about David Harvey and his spatial fix. I mean, in a way, it's so the iconographical fix is also a spatial fix, and so I think what we, you know, from 2000 years of distance think is characteristic of how we imagine polytheism, you know, is really a result of, is an urban development of, you know, this spatial and iconographical fix of gods in the city. But I think one cannot, in history of religion, speak of iconography without mentioning iconoclasm. So each iconography has its iconoclasm, and so I mean, Adrienne talked about this, you know, the known place, and you know what I had beyond in the English version of the book. So, I mean, this is in a way at the same time. So to have a, I mean, attributing agency to the gods, I mean, is also attributing whimsy to the gods, so that they are really independent actors. And so the spatial and iconographical fix needs to be questioned, you know, by notions of a smaller or larger transcendence, by, you know, more and less radical iconoclastic options to sort of keep this constitutive tension, ambivalence of the divine. But it's a great point. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor, is there a clash of gods in the ancient city? A clash of iconographic programs of gods in the ancient city? We can speak like this: a clash of gods, a clash of images in the ancient city.
A quick note to this. I mean, this is, I mean, I don't have a clear. I mean, I don't have any explanation for that. But it's, I mean, it's so interesting to see that in I mean, in most of what we call polytheisms, it's rather, I mean, it's at the most a sort of controlling the inflation, the unlimited proliferation of new combinations and images by, you know, giving special preference and, you know, producing a statue in gold rather than in bronze or silver of some form, so that you have the Phidian Zeus, you know, more often replicated than some others. But I mean, it's extremely rare that, you know, clash in the sense of, you know, the one is fighting the other. It's a benevolent competition, and the clash is then whether you like images or not, and then the non-likers, I mean, take the hammer and crush your images. I mean, this is what we can frequently, I mean, from time to time and often in radical ways observe. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor. One last question. Professor, is it possible to point out that the Christianization of spaces in the Mediterranean cities from the 4th century onwards profoundly reorganized the norms that created the notion of urbanity in the Roman world? Is it possible to say that Christianity, by preaching a notion of a better life in another realm, world, or even city, ended up changing, in some extent, the individual's experience with the lived space of the city? Into Portuguese. Minha última pergunta ao professor Rüpke. Let me see. Professor, é possível apontar que a cristianização dos espaços das cidades mediterrâneas a partir do século IV reorganizou profundamente as normas que compõem a noção de urbanidade no mundo romano? É possível dizer que o cristianismo, ao pregar uma noção de uma vida melhor em um outro mundo, reino ou cidade, acabou alterando em algum sentido a experiência do indivíduo com o espaço vivido da cidade? Okay, Professor, let's go.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, and I think one should not give a single answer to this because we see so many different trajectories. So, I mean, if you accept that the most stable center of ancient Christianity, and I hope the Roman Catholics will have mercy on me, you know, was Constantinople, Byzantium, I mean, which is the Christian place in the ancient and constant Christian place in the ancient Mediterranean. I mean, hardly any other city managed to keep its ancient pre-Christian landscape so perfectly as Constantinople. And in a way, I mean, if we think about the 4th, or rather 5th and 6th and 7th century, I mean, in many instances, I mean, what we see is a lack of, often a lack of further investments. But I mean, the new Christian population and new Christian leaderships, bishops included, I mean, try to continue, you know, even structures like baths, public baths, you know, which even many, I mean, there was also, you know, illicit sexuality hiding behind the next wall, but in the end, I mean, also many church fathers, you know, advocated going regularly to baths for hygienic reasons, and, you know, your body is the temple of God, and so on, and, you know, such a body needs regular bathing, I think that it was not Christianity that shaped reshaped the cities, but rather, let us say, the reshaping of connectivities. You know, I mean, we must not lose sight of the economic side of cities. I mean, cities are centers of production, but above all of consumption, and so they are knots and hubs of trade networks. And if these networks change, so changes also the face and the landscape, the urban landscape. I mean, again, if we take a look, so to use this as a test case, in the rise of Islam, I mean, which again is a, and perhaps even more radical, you know, otherworldly religion, you know, with its notion of paradise. I mean, Islam was certainly an urban culture, and pushing and supporting cities, you know, at the end of late antiquity. So yeah, I think the answer. So the otherworldly elements of Christianity might, in principle, you know, have led to the demise of cities. But that this didn't happen, or it happened only under very specific and probably different circumstances and conditions. So I think there is no causal, or only a very, very thin causal relationship here.
Okay, Professor, thank you for your answers, brilliant answers. I hope we have someday the translation of Professor's book, Pantheon, into Portuguese, because it's a magistral work on Roman religion. So thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Cormichiari, for the opportunity here. It's a great honor to be here today with you.
Thank you. I thank you all. Muito obrigada a todos. Vamos abrir, então. Professor Rüpke, can we stay with you 10 minutes more? I'd like to open questions to the public. Maybe? There's already one. Yeah.
Hi, Professor. My name is Rodrigo. I am PhD candidate under the supervision of... Are you listening to me, or it's too very low? That's good. Okay. Under the supervision of Professor Cormichiari. And thank you very much for your presentation. It was really nice. Your book is already in my list to read about it and understand about the city religion. But, you know, it's very funny because today I was talking about, well, no day city, but the question here is about, it's about the analogies to understand how do you consider how the practice are changing the city. For example, I just put it down. It's like, for example, it's just an insight. And thinking the Brazilian case, for example, we have here something that we call encruzilhadas. It's something like crossing areas in Portuguese, and they are places devoted to the people who practice Umbanda and Candomblé that have African roots, and it's kind of more or less something like the Santeria in the United States. But in these places, in these encruzilhadas, the people deposit pottery, fruits, food, and in some cases you have animal sacrifices. But in general, this happens in the peripheries of the city here in São Paulo. It's not a usual thing in the city center. Sometimes you have, but it's more in the neglected areas of the city. But the thing is, am I right to consider that you are trying to understand the space in antiquity as these spaces of always changing by the people, because, for example, this Umbanda and Candomblé, it's not it's kind of a faith that's not very respected by our governments. For example, for Bolsonaro, things I think will change right now, hope so. But the following, am I making any sense in here? It's just something, it's a kind of a brainstorm, because I just want to understand if this practice, they practice at Candomblé and something like that, in antiquity are suggesting that it could happen the same in some spaces, like I don't know, in public gardens, something like that. Am I clear? Okay, all right. Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's Rodrigo, if I understood correctly. I mean, that's a very interesting question, and let me. I mean, there is constant change in complex places, and I mean, we cannot trace all of this, and so I mean, I'm of course interested in looking at long-term developments, and certainly one of these long-term developments is that I mean, space is extremely scarce in cities. I mean, this is in a way, all this the analysis of not only of economists but also then of Henri Lefebvre and the question of the right to the city. So it's only the capitalists who are to define urban space, and that is to say, the quality, the identificational, the let us say aspirational potential of such spaces. So I mean, what we see, I think, today as in antiquity is, on the one hand, that people use the city to hide, to create small groups, so intellectual circles are discussing the 16th gospel, Christian gospel, or are creating some place where you can do your nice Dionysiac ritual and drinking afterwards or in between already. And for that purpose, I mean, they hide, so to speak, in private houses. So it's in the city center, but it's invisible for the streets outside. But I mean, even for this, you need a minimum of space, of private space, and many people in antiquity, living in these insulae, I mean, they didn't have even an hearth of their own, so they were they had to rely on these tabernae and street food, so to speak. And if that is the case, I mean, the second option is to go where space is available and not as regulated. And this is this is the case in the what then is called the suburb, but it's in a way it's the lift. So the cemeteries of the suburb or suburban spaces, which you also see being filled by small sanctuaries and so on. I mean, this is from now in a spatial and not an administrative analysis. This is lived city space. I mean, this is where people did, being urbanites, so to speak. So in that sense, I think we have to not only as academics as well as citizens, I mean, not only focus, on the big cathedrals and temples in the city center, but also, on what is happening in the backyards, and what is happening on the outskirts. And this is sometimes small scale, sheep religion, but sometimes it's also mega churches being built, with big parking lots, because in outside of walking distance, space is even cheaper, and if people have cars, they can go there 25,000 every hour on a Sunday. So and this and there we should not, in the sense of the spatial spatial turn, we should not, limit our analytical capacity or let it be limited by city walls, which are, not of the utmost importance for these practices. That would be my answer, or attempt at, comparing antiquity and what we can see in today's cities.
No, lovely, no, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Professor Rüpke. Is there any other questions? Yeah? Okay.
Em primeiro lugar, muito obrigado ao IEA, ao LARP e a todos os organizadores por esse evento importantíssimo. Thank you, Professor Rüpke. I would like to make a comment and a question. I'm Felipe Ribeiro. I'm from the Future for Religious Heritage organization. And I would like to know if you are acquainted with the research of the Professor Zeni Rosenthal called Hierópolis. She is a Brazilian researcher. If you can comment something on her research, it would be very nice. And also, what do you think are the actually, how is the religious heritage and the cultural heritage organizations such as UNESCO are receiving researches like yours of urban religiosity, and what would you propose for these issues nowadays? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I must admit that I haven't read the work of Rosenthal. I think that a colleague of mine, or a fellow now here, and a colleague of yours, Frederick Vandenberg, has mentioned the name to me. I mean, there is this urban studies. I mean, as you know, more than 50% of humanity is now living in cities. Urban studies are flourishing, and I mean, you can't follow the number of books that do appear. So I mean, I mean, heritage is an important notion. I'm a bit acquainted with the work on South Asian cities and the concept of heritage in the work of Nanini Yahamini, and I mean, the question always is, I mean, heritage is trying to mediate between practitioners on the one hand, and which might be even a minority or might already been lacking, and you know, a general populace, political establishment. I mean, this is different from place to place. I think what we have to be, so often discussions are about, you know, who is appropriation of religious sites in order to preserve them. And I mean, what I do observe is that basically in every monumental structure there are different interests invested, so to speak, and founders, in a way, our image of religion. And let's take Christianity. You know, is an image that is in its architectural shape, that is not so much shaped by bishops and dogmatics, but it's shaped by patrons, patronage, and donors, sponsors, whoever you call them, and by artists, so it's I mean, they shape the spaces that then are used and have to be used, for the lack of alternatives often, by the normal religious people and pious. So there is always this confrontation between, I mean, not necessarily a confrontation, but interaction between different stakeholders. And heritage, the notion of heritage is yeah, I mean, multiplying the problems, but also showing an awareness of the material character of religion, of culture, and above all of urban religion. And here we come back to this, spatial fix, so to speak. I mean, this has consequences for theology, but also has this long-term consequences. So it's very few rituals that are giving the status of, UNESCO global heritage. It's much more physical structures that are given this status. And again, this creates imbalances. I'm sorry, that is a bit weird, and you can see that I'm not an expert in that discussion, but thank you very much even more for raising this point.
Thank you all. Is there any other question? Last one. Oh, we have also from the internet, some people who are watching on the YouTube. So it's someone called André. He wants to thank very much for the presentation here, and he's asking for a book, of course, André. André, vou te mandar. Você entra em contato com a gente. Okay, so he's just thanking for the presentation. Wagner, were you going to ask a question?
I don't have any question, but I just want to thank you, Professor Rüpke, for this opportunity.
Yeah.
It's a great opportunity to join everybody here. See again our colleague, Professor Takla. And don't forget, this moment is very important to say, is the protagonism of this moment is for Labeca, not LARP. It's important to say. And thank you, Alex.
The two laboratories of Mediterranean archaeology work together.
And I would like to say that we wait for a professor here in Brazil.
Yeah.
For the
2024. Yes, it's going to happen.
And again, muito obrigado pelo pessoal do EA.
Thank you once again for the professionals of the Advanced Studies Institute.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, Adrienne. Thank you so much, Alessandro. And above all, thank you so much, Professor Rüpke, for being with us this evening, because it's evening in Germany. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Muito obrigado. It was already dark when we started, so but days are short now on the northern part of the hemisphere.
All right. Thank you so much. So bye all.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Obrigada pelo convite. Foi muito bom.
Obrigado, Adrienne.
Thank you very much, all of you.